The term half-face blows comes up quite regularly in the videos, and frequently there are questions about what is a half-face blow and what are you really talking about? What are you trying to achieve with a half-face blow? It is particularly important in tong making, and often that is where people are having trouble, is creating good shoulders while making a pair of tongs, and understanding the concept of a half-face blow is very important. So let's go over to the forge, let's heat some stock up, and let's talk a little bit about what a half-face blow really is. We're not going to make an actual project, we're just going to discuss the technique. Simply put, a half-face blow means that if there was no stock between the hammer and the anvil, half of the hammer face would land on the anvil and half of the hammer face would be hanging out in midair. And that's the same whether you're here at the near side of the anvil or at the far side of the anvil. Half the hammer face is on the anvil, half the hammer face is off. Now what does this do for you when you're forging? If this is our anvil, and we have a piece of material up on the anvil, like this, and the hammer comes down half on the anvil and half off, what happens to this material? Well, what happens is we end up thinning the material where it is on the anvil and offsetting the material and leaving it full thickness where it is off the anvil, because the hammer is pushing down on the anvil here to thin this, but there's nothing to resist it. So it's pushing it down past the anvil, and by doing it this way, you don't end up with a step up here. If you try to do this all on top of the anvil, if you're trying to do it up with the hammer on the edge of the anvil, you end up with a little step here, a thin section, and a little step there, and that's more like forging a tenon than forging an offset. And this is the goal when you're doing half-face blows. Now I know that was a fairly crude drawing, but hopefully it gets the point across. Now let's look at it in hot iron at the anvil. So the material is on the anvil where you want your shoulders right at the edge. Hammer half on, half off. And that should form a shoulder. And there we have the shoulder formed about half of the thickness of the material. And that's all there is to it. That's a half-face blow. And since this often comes up in connection with making tongs, let's look at a half-face blow on the other side and turn this into a simple tong blank. So this is really exactly the same at the far side of the anvil. We hang over what we want to shoulder. The hammer is half on, half off. And you can work your way back and come up on the anvil and just leave that shoulder where you want it. And if you need to refine this part, you can come back to the near edge of the anvil, back to the far side of the anvil. And it does take some refining at the face a little bit. But essentially, that's the jaw and the boss for a pair of tongs now. And we'll start forming the rein just because that's what we're kind of in the middle of here. But we're not going to finish the pair of tongs. We're just talking about the concept of half-face blows. So again, we just hang over the amount we want to offset. Hammer half on, half off. Then we can work our way back to start drawing out the reins. Because that swells, we can come back and work that step some more. And often this kind of thing is back and forth. But that should fairly clearly explain the idea behind half face blows and a very typical use for a half face blow. Now, are half face blows something that you can only do at the anvil? No, of course not. You can use the same technique even if it isn't actually a hammer blow. So let's take a look at half face blows both under the power hammer, and the same technique would then apply to the treadle hammer. Then we'll look at it under the hydraulic press, and the same technique would apply using it under a manual press like a fly press. Now, under the power hammer, you can sort of hang this over just like we did at the anvil and use something like a flatter to create the half face blow, but there's a real tendency for this to want to kick down, and it's somewhat problematic. So it's probably a little bit better to put something up on top of the bottom die and use this as your anvil, so you're half facing this tool, not half facing the bottom die. I hope that makes sense. So that looks something like this in use. We can then use that same technique off the back side, so this now becomes the back of the anvil, and we can then work off the back side. So you can work here, you can work here, you can work here, and you can do all the same things under the power hammer by using this as the bottom edge of your anvil and the top die as the hammer. So there you see how we can get a half face blow on the near side and on the far side while working under the power hammer, and we've got some freedom of movement here to change exactly where those blows are occurring. And then of course the concept is the same under the hydraulic press, except I'm going to be using a little piece of scrap instead of a handheld tool, because it will just sit there on the bottom die of the hydraulic press, and that allows me both hands free to manipulate the work. Well, I hope that helps explain the concept of a half-face blow. As you see, we can do this any place. You can offset the top and the bottom to create that half-face blow effect. You can do it at the edge of the anvil, the edge of the hardy hole. You can put an anvil block in. You can do it at the power hammer, the treadle hammer, a fly press, or hydraulic press. Now the hydraulic press, because it gives one long push, is not quite as versatile. It moves a lot of material really fast, but you don't get the fine adjustments and the control that you do sometimes with some of the other tools. But the ability is there, and if you're going to do the same thing over and over again, like making tongs, you can actually make some specific dies that really give that half-faced blow effect very well. But again, it is just the hammer landing half on the anvil, half off, and by doing so, it thins the stock over the anvil and offsets the stock without thinning it where it's off of the anvil. And you can do it on the near side of the anvil, the far side of the anvil. And as I said, any way you can create that half-face blow effect by adding an edge somewhere that you're working half on and half off of will give the same effect. I hope that answers the questions some people have had. And for those of you who have been having trouble getting your tongs to come out nice and even, this is the concept that you really have to master, and you can work on it doing other things. We used it on the door handle project just yesterday, so it comes in handy for a lot of different projects. But that's all I have today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Love it if you hit that subscribe button. Stick around, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends. But then make time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.